We are here today to talk about food justice, which is, something that I think our panelists for sure, but all of y'all in the room here think is a really important part of a successful Farmstop. Presumably, otherwise you wouldn't be here in this room. So we don't have as much time as, we were hoping for hours for this panel, but so we're going to 12:35. Okay. So I'm just going to introduce our panelists briefly so that we can jump right in, and then, then I'll take the mic back. Okay. So Jonathan. Jonathan is the CEO and founder of Victory Gardens in Rock Hill, South Carolina. And so Victory Gardens is one of those amazing pandemic stories, right, Jonathan? So Jonathan's coming out of 25 years in media and journalism. Your wife is in accounting and banking. And during the pandemic, they took a passion for gardening and turned it into this really beautiful organization to address food apartheid in your community. And we're going to hear a lot more about that in a minute. So Mike Hainstock is the executive director of Lakeshore Depot, which is in Marquette, Michigan, which is in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, right? Go you. So Mike comes from a background in farming, and I think you're still involved with Partridge Creek Farm, right? And the Partridge Creek Compost. So these those challenges have helped you really understand what kind of challenges and opportunities are existing even from the farming community, and brought that to the experience of working with Lakeshore Depot. Will is from our fabulous organization. Will Moyer is from Argus, and runs the online store, the subscription programs, and wholesale accounts for Argus Farmstop, in addition to being the food justice guy at the organization. And so that's why he's here today. I think you have both a practical and academic background in farming, food justice, running these sorts of programs. So Will has a master's degree in watershed management, cool, and then also has spent a lot of time managing mixed vegetable farms all over the eastern half of the U.S. So that what's I think really exciting about that is that we have lots of different backgrounds that folks are coming from, and what I'm particularly excited about with this panel, and thanks to the Argus folks who helped organize these folks, is that we're going to hear we're going to hear about food justice in three really different contexts. And so my first question for you guys is going to be to just, before we jump into what food justice means to you and what food justice programs you're doing, just to tell us a little bit about the context in which you're doing that work, because we have three really different sort of demographic communities that you're operating in. And my hope, and I think our hope for y'all, is that you can see yourselves in one of these models. So we're trying to aim for diversity. So people are going to be telling different stories. But Jonathan, can you kick us off and just tell us a little bit about Rock Creek? I'm sorry, Rock Hill.
Rock Hill.
Rock Hill is a neighborhood I used to live in DC. So
okay.
I'm sorry.
Rock Hill, South Carolina. So we are part of the much larger Charlotte, North Carolina DMA. We're very much on the outskirts. My community, our community specifically, 30% of the community lives below the poverty line, thanks to a partnership between a local community action group in the city of Rock Hill. There was a feasibility study that was conducted, and just alarming statistics came out of that. Obviously, 30% below the poverty line compared to, I think, 11% on a national level. 50% of the community is considered to be obese. Hypertension, diabetes, high blood pressure are all crippling statistics that kind of face this largely African-American community. And so for us, kind of what food justice looks like for us is like, it's a much different kind of dichotomy compared to even Charlotte. When we talk about accessibility, it's not so much about accessibility, more so it's about education and learning new sets of skills. So I think in this day and age, everybody's looking for a quick meal, and in larger communities or in other communities, accessibility to a healthier fast food is a little bit more readily available. In marginalized community, it is not there. And then just the overall connection. as it relates to minorities, specifically African Americans, just our diaspora with the land and access to food is much different from the general population. And so we have a whole different set of, kind of issues to overcome, and many of them are just fueled by systemic racism. And so we have to address that issue. When we talk about diversity in the social justice movement, there are not very many people that look like me, who have a seat at the table to have this conversation. Even as we look around the room today, you can clearly see there's a lack of representation from several different communities. And I think the question that we have to start asking is who is not at the table. And we have to be bold enough to do that in order to make sure that this food justice system is much more, has more equity and more equality. So that's kind of my position.
Thanks.
So yeah, I'm from Marquette, which we're that's the UP. Marquette is, so I think the entirety of the Upper Peninsula has like 3% of the population of the state of Michigan, and Marquette is kind of a cultural and population anomaly, sort of. So we have like a really thriving food co-op that has just done a tremendous job over the last 20 years of, engaging the community, teaching people of the importance of local food. And so Marquette itself has actually like a fairly thriving local food scene for the size of population that we have. And then what we've kind of began to see, as we've gone on and what we're doing, the work we're doing, is that the communities outside of Marquette with smaller populations are not going to be able to support a Farmstop or something else to bring, increased food access. And so that's kind of one of the biggest challenges and sort of demographics, I guess, we're working with.
Thanks.
So we operate in Ann Arbor, Argus Farmstop, which is a wealthy, educated town. I think the medium household income is $80,000. The medium house price is $420,000. I think 80% of the city over 25 has a bachelor's degree. It's a overall, from the demographic, the census snapshot, it's a very affluent community. But it is, as we've built these food access programs, we've realized that a high medium doesn't mean that there is a lack of people who are facing food insecurity. So figuring out, one of our challenges has been figuring out how to promote Argus as a place that has accessible local food, and make sure we have programs that can bring in a customer base that isn't, the wealthy, white, college-educated professor. How can we show up for the entirety of our community and not just those that know about us.
Great, thank you. So as you can see, 3 really different contexts, and I hope that, as I said, wherever you're coming from, you can see yourselves in one of these examples. So let's do it. Let's jump into food justice, and we'll start with you again, Jonathan. If you can just tell us what food justice means to you in the organization, and I think let's just dive into some of the programs that you guys are running.
So this food justice movement, right, for us, we didn't realize that there was a place called or a term food justice. For us, it was really about trying to make sure that we were able to get good quality food and food on folks' table. So our model or our way of approaching this from a Farmstop perspective may be a little different from some of my fellow panelists. For us, the focus for us is more about food accessibility and affordability than it is locality. And so somehow or another, we've got to figure out a way to kind of merge that in our city. And then I think that this is a challenge in most marginalized communities. When folks are trying to put food on the table, they don't always think about whether or not the food is local, more so than they figure out whether or not I can afford it and whether or not it gives me some calories, although it may be empty calories. And so it's a much different perspective when we're in these communities. However, 70% of our clientele still comes from outside of the community. And so we're still trying to find a way of merging. How do we how do we take and educate folks on what social justice looks like from a food perspective, from the individuals who are facing it, versus, kind of educating the outside community on how they can play a part in helping sustain that. And so I know for us, we moved to a kind of different concept moving into this year, where our market is completely pay what you will. And so in that process, we've really kind of lowered the barrier to allow individuals to be able to there's no excuse now for individuals to be able to afford fresh and local produce. However, the second challenge of that now is, because they've been conditioned so long of eating processed food, now it's educating them on how to prepare that food. And so we're spending a lot of time on nutrition education, which I think is really the game changer for us, and trying to find more, trying to be more engaging in that process. But again, I think what the food social justice movement needs to focus in on is, one, not food shaming people. And we've got to get out of this thing of like, hey, if you want to be healthier, you got to be vegan, or you got to be vegetarian, or you got to be this and that. It's more important for us to just make sure that people are eating well. And then the second side of it is just making people feel inclusive in this process. And so social justice or food justice from our perspective is, I think we need to kind of tear down some of the labels, right? And I think we just need to get in the communities, do good work, and let's not label it, because I think when we do that, we exclude an entire group of people who may not necessarily follow that sort of piece. If it is truly a movement and not a moment, then we tear down labels.
So yeah, something, I've noticed operating Lakeshore Depot is that we kind of started off with this focus of, we're here to help farmers and improve food access that way. And it's, become kind of quickly apparent to us that there's a lot of other food access and food justice challenges out there to meet on the kind of consumer side of things. And so we're looking at, starting to reach out and identify, what are those barriers to access? I think we're all aware of like affordability and that sort of thing, but also what about physical access? People who can't, physically go to the grocery store, maybe it's too far away, or, people that might have mental health challenges where, they're feeling depressed or struggling with drug addiction or something and just can't get to the store. Or, as he was saying, just knowing how to utilize these local products. We give people beets or something in their CSA box, they don't know how to use them, they get thrown out or given away. So really like trying to reach out into the community and engage them to help identify what the barriers, are to food access for them, and help us sort of understand the solutions and then empower them to participate in that process.
Before you jump in, Mike, can you talk about the specific ways that you guys are addressing some of those issues?
Yeah, so the biggest ones we're doing right now are like working with the incentive programs like Double Up Food Bucks. We do the Michigan Farm to Family CSA program, which for anyone not familiar, people with a bridge card can pay $7.50 to get a $30 box of produce. We get the remainder of that subsidized. And that's just, it totally flips the scales on affordability for people. So that's been a really easy kind of, path in for us to start solving that problem. And then I would say now our next biggest challenge that we're looking to take on is just like geographic distribution. Like, how do we start reaching food out into these adjacent communities outside of Marquette, and kind of like develop partnerships with people who maybe have reach into those communities and understanding of what the needs are, where the people are, and how to connect with them, to kind of build up a network of like distribution points where we can start getting more food around adjacent areas.
Thanks.
So at food justice is such a broad topic, and it has so many facets to it, but we really, kind of what ties it all together for us is we want communities to be able to control their food production and distribution, and what that is reliant on is both for the producer, the farmer, and the consumer to have meaningful choice in their participation in the system. So the farm gets to decide what they want to grow, what they want to do with their land, where they want to sell, how they want to sell. And then the consumer gets to decide from a marketplace full of stuff what they would like to purchase and how they would like to participate in the system. And it needs to be meaningful in a way that you're not asking a low-income individual to spend 50% of their budget on food. And so we've been trying to figure out how to. We've spent kind of the first 7 or 8 years of our business really building up that local infrastructure, making sure we have sustainable systems that we can quickly partner with food justice programs, with initiatives that are meant to get local food into more places. So we also partner with MFF, and we do about 3,000. We distribute about 3,000 of those subsidized boxes a year to customers on EBT. We also participate in Double Up Food Bucks. And then it's just figuring out what other organizations we're able to partner with to figure out how to bridge that gap between making sure that our producers and our farmers are getting paid an equitable and fair value for the products that they provide us with, and then also making sure that there is a space where customers are able to make that choice. We've been focusing with the grants and the partnerships we currently have on customers using SNAP and EBT benefits, but we're also thinking of ways that we can partner to find those that are missed, those people that don't quite qualify for food assistance but are not able to participate in the local food economy to their full ability because of the financial burden that it brings. So we're working on it.
Thanks, Jonathan.
It's one of the, I guess, bad sides of going first is because someone else will say something that'll allow you to think. So I've got to kind of loosen up here a little bit. I do want to make a point that in marginalized communities, we're more focused on food sovereignty than we are this kind of food justice piece, right? Because he who controls your food controls you. And so we've got to be focused on the cultural appropriation piece as it relates to food. And I think as a whole, when we talk about food justice and this healthier lifestyle piece, that we miss out on that. And so it's difficult for me to talk to an elder African-American woman and tell her that, hey, this kale is better for you than these collard greens, right? Because when it comes to, I can only speak specifically to the African American community, and I'm sure it is like this with many of us, but food is very intimate. And so for me to tell you that your collard greens with fat back in it is not good for you in comparison to something else, I am taking away someone's legacy. I am offending them, their grandparents, the heritage of their family. And so I think that we have to tread very lightly. As much as we would like to focus on really pushing the narrative about local farmers, for us, it is more important for us to provide culturally appropriate foods and then walk our way into that. And it's really a slow walk. And I think what we have learned, we want to come in and we've got these big plans and we go in and we really, it's very counterproductive for us if we don't take that. And so I know for us specifically, we live in the community that we serve. And so now it is not us coming in and telling the community what they need as opposed to listening. And now it is a friend, a neighbor who is carefully trying to build something specifically for the community. And I think that has been a challenge in this entire movement, is that we come in and, I love academics, but we come in with this kind of book theory and say, hey, this is what needs to happen, as opposed to being very customized and very tailored to the community in which we serve.
Yeah, thanks. Sounds like Will wants to build on that.
Yeah, I agree completely. I don't view farm stops as the people who should define what food justice looks like for a community. Our role is to be able to support that. So I want to, like at Argus, our goal is to build a local food economy that when a food justice initiative comes, we're able to supply them with food. You know, we want to build the infrastructure that allows people to do the good work that they want to do. But in the point that Jonathan just brought up, like I've had initiatives that I thought, this is great, like I'm going to really ram this down people's throat, and nobody wants the bags of food that I'm giving out. And I'm not sure why, but it's because I'm not, you know, in that community, I'm not their neighbors, and if I had paused and taken some time to let them take the steering wheel and just provided the expertise and the support that we have as a Farmstop, I think we would have gotten a lot more traction. And we're starting to get that more with the programs that we currently operate in.
Cool. So I'm going to pull out three things from what you just said, and then I'm going to take us in a different direction. And you both, so you said, well, communities controlling essentially the means of production, not to be overly, you know, Marxist about it, but right. But I think you're both saying that food sovereignty looks like having control over your own food economy, and so I think that's an important thing. And related to that, then, is the idea of living in the community that you serve. And Will, part of the problem, at least, I've experienced myself in early days, is like, great news, Jonathan, I'm here with the food boxes, you're welcome. Is like doesn't really work, right? And so the important thing is the three of you in really different communities, and all y'all in really different communities, is like, how do you show up in your community and then offer partnership if the folks around you are interested in coming to you and inviting partnership, right? And so partnership is the partnership, and then you said in the beginning, seat at the table. Right. And I want to come back to seat at the table, because I think I'd like to query a little bit what that looks like in the context we're talking about. So those are just some themes I heard you say, and then I actually want to get a little tactical, if we can, for folks before we open it up for questions. So you were talking about pay what you will. I don't know about you, but I'm totally curious about, like, how does the economics of that work, right? So let's talk about that. You guys, so Fair Food Network operates Double Up Food Bucks in Michigan, and also the National Technical Assistance Program. So most of you are familiar with nutrition incentive programs. So, happily, those are kind of institutionalized now. If you'd like to learn more, we'd be happy to tell you about it. But I'm kind of interested in some of the, like, innovative, crazy, wacky things that you're also talking about. The geographic distribution issue, especially in the rural context, and then the boxes and other things you're working on. So let's go in there. But I think folks are probably interested in the pay what you will thing, right? So let's do that.
All right, so pay what you will actually started. So I think we heard earlier with Undersecretary talking about LFPA, so it's the Local Food Purchasing Assistance Program. So that was a statewide program. We are lucky enough, as a producer, we grow hydroponic lettuce. We're both a producer and a distributor as a part of that process. So we're getting roughly around 800 pounds of local produce a week for our small store. It was kind of sitting on the shelf, right? Because folks would come in, they couldn't afford it, they didn't know what it was, I remember one lady coming in, we had Jerusalem artichokes. She bought a big bag of them. She goes home and says, "This is not ginger." Yeah, you're absolutely right. So we tried it out in the month of December of really just saying, hey, we've got good produce, right? I think when people think about what is seasonable, when we get into the cooler months, but we've got beets, and and there's a variety of different beets, and we've got sweet potatoes, and we've got all of these different great products, but they were just not moving because people typically kind of come to us during the spring months, but they kind of stay away from us. So we said, hey, listen, let's just try it out, blow some of this stuff out. We'll go with a pay what you will model. Worked out incredibly well for us. So we are a nonprofit. So profitability, although very important for us, it is not the driving force for what we do. And as we all know, produce just has a tremendous low margin anyway. So folks will come in, they'll get $15. Someone may come in and say, hey, I've only got $5. Great. Now it gives them a sense of pride, though, that they can come in, and it's very transactional. And I think that that's very important when we're talking about marginalized communities. It's not always about a handout. And I think, I forgive me for saying it this way, but when I look around the room, we've got to kind of get over this white saviors mentality. Like, oh, I want to come in. It's about me. I fed someone today. It makes me feel good. But the individual on the opposite end, you are crippling that individual by constantly giving. You have to make it transactional. And so there's so much more pride when an individual can come in. Instead of getting a box full of things that they may not eat, now they have a selective process. They can pick up the things that they know that they're going to use. And when we talk about food waste, this allows for that to practically be eliminated. So that individual comes in, they get $15 worth, they pay me $5, great. Well, then another individual comes in, they get that same $15 worth, and they pay me $25. And so overall, it finds a way of kind of balancing itself out. And so it was so successful for us during the month of December because of LFPA. Now we're able to offer it throughout the year. Now, our challenge is that grant is only good until June of 2025. And so we've got to figure out now, how do we kind of move to the next phase of that, perhaps going into a tiered model. But for us, it has truly been successful on our end of making sure that the food gets out. Not so much about the economics of it all, but in order to actually get local produce into the marketplace, it has worked out extremely well for us.
Okay, that's helpful. I'm gonna have some more questions about that.
Okay, go for it.
So I think what you're saying is that you said $15 worth, but you're not actually putting the price on it. Like they don't know that it's $15 worth necessarily.
Yeah,
or
no,
do
they
they
actually do. So we actually put pricing on it.
You do,
now, what
okay.
we do though, we put stickers on certain things that are available for pay what you will, and then other items that we're buying wholesale is market price. So the individual still has an opportunity now to know, especially for the individual who is not paying what you will from an economic standpoint. Now they're able to see, okay, this is truly $15, but I know that if I pay a little bit more, it offsets the individual who doesn't. So it's important for us to actually put pricing on it. And I think it's good for individuals to know what the marketplace is, where it really is. And so I don't want people to come in and say, oh, I can get a sweet potato for 2 cents. Well, the market demands that you're getting $1.95 for this. And so I think it's also an education process too, because people really, and especially our young people, they really need to know the cost of food. And so I think that that's extremely important too, to really kind of say, hey, this is where the market is at. Although you may be under it now, you've got to know that food prices are going up, and here's the reason why.
Okay, that's helpful. So on the economics, what I'm hearing you say is that partially it's offset by folks who are paying a little bit more,
Correct.
and with folks who are paying a little bit less, but you're also offsetting with an LFPP grant.
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
So
the
those federal
economics
funds
don't necessarily work without the grant.
And I don't know how that works from a for-profit standpoint. I just know for us, this is kind of the best model for it. But I'm sure that even partnering with someone who is an actual distributor may be another way of offsetting that too, even for the for-profit company.
Great, thanks. That's really great. So talk to us about rural context.
Yeah, so I guess I'll just kind of build off that same point. Our goal is to maximize the amount of money we're paying to farmers, but also to minimize the cost to consumers. And so, as a for-profit business that's trying to be mission-based, we're just constantly in the middle of that and pinched. And so I think it's really, a critical part of it is how do we get creative funding solutions to offset that, whether it be large grants that subsidize us as an organization or, incentive programs that we put in the hands of consumers. I think historically we've kind of tried this, model of subsidizing our farmers, which then ends up in the hands of large farmers predominantly. And, we've kind of seen some of the results of that. And so, I found that the consumer side incentive programs, really seem to be highly effective in that they allow the consumers to come in and, pick up things that are market price on the shelf, and then end up paying less money out of pocket for it, and kind of shifts it to being more affordable than it would be for them to go to Moyer or somewhere like that.
Moyer is a grocery store chain based here in Michigan.
Yeah. So up by us, there's a new program that's recently started called the Fresh Food Access Program. It's kind of based on the prescription for health model, which is where people who have chronic health conditions can get a referral from their doctor to get vouchers to go buy produce at the farmer's market. So that's been a really popular program, and they've now created a version of that where they're giving people vouchers to use for local dairy, meat, eggs, honey, maple syrup, and wild rice. And so then, that program is just launched, and they're sending out vouchers to people all across the UP, and they have like a handful of different farms that they're working with. And so we found we're uniquely positioned as a farm stop where, since we're direct sourcing from all these local farms, we sort of have this like central point that they can send people to redeem these vouchers. But then one of the other big challenges that we've run into in the region is that they're sending vouchers to people that are 150 miles away from us, or someone that's 85 years old and bedridden and just can't leave the house, or and so there's this actual physical access element that they're solving the financial side of it, and so now we're starting to move into kind of how can we leverage partnerships within different communities and sort of set up a network where we could then like kind of take our store, put it onto a school bus or something like that, create a mobile market and like bring it out into these communities, or kind of just how can we potentially leverage other partners in different regions to reach in and understand what their community needs, and then also like allow us as a farm stop to kind of focus on the aspects of that food system that we specialize in, which would be like retail, grocery, and sourcing and aggregation and activities like that.
I want to open it up for questions. We have, not enough time. But Will, do you want to add? Is there anything you want to add into that?
Just a quick thing to follow up with Mike's point about being a for-profit. When we're considering partnerships, we have a couple of considerations. One, like what is that community serving? Two, how sustainable is their funding? Because we don't want to start programs, get consumers that are utilizing that only to stop it a month later. Being able to provide a service that we provide consistently for all of our customers is important. But we also need systems that streamline or merge with our current systems as effortlessly as possible, both for us, but also for the customer. We want that customer transaction when they come into the store to be the same regardless of what method they're paying with. We also want those processes on the back end to be as streamlined so we can maximize the amount of that funding that gets put back to the farms and to the consumer, rather than having to pay ourselves for like triple labor to do a third of the sales because we're trying some novel system.
Really good point. So I am going to open up for questions. I think I see one there in the purple. But while the microphone's on its way to you, so the two things that we talked about that I would love to dig into, so we'll just put a pin in for conversations over lunch, is the mobile market thing, because that I think is really helpful in the rural context, but kind of everywhere else too. And so talking about how that works, and one of my questions is, who out here is doing mobile market really well, and can we talk about that? And then I think that maximizing the financial, the financial systems is critical to making these things work. So, well, those are our pins and our question.
My question is to Jonathan, back to what you had talked about, tearing down labels, and I was wondering if you could be more specific about it. What labels do you think need to be, torn down in order to make everything more just?
So, great example. We operate a community garden. So I ask the ladies, because they're mainly, we call it our silver gardening club, and so the ladies are there, and so me being kind of new to this term of food justice, I ask, how many of you all are food insecure? Right? I'm using language that in our world makes sense, but in their world makes zero sense. And so they're looking at me and they're like, none of us. We all have food in our cupboard, right? The question is, what type of food? And so it is a lot of heavily processed food, but to them, their cupboards are full, right? So I think that when we talk about labels, we've got to be very careful not to use language that one kind of goes over people's head. When we talk, again, for me, it's less about kind of this food justice movement and more about just making sure that people have good quality food on the table. And so if we get caught up in the terms and the language, we are missing people and we are basically wiping people off of the table when it comes to really doing the work of making sure that people have an independent food system.
Thank you. I think, no. All right, so if you have a question, raise your hand just so I can see what the room looks like.
You're next.
Okay, good. Let's start. But we'll go here and then back there.
I'm interested specifically with you two gentlemen. Where are we at when we talk food justice? We've skirted around this issue. We've said a lot of different things. We've talked about collard greens as opposed to kale. We've talked about food access. And there's two things that we're kind of dancing around. And one is the level of processed food that you just mentioned. And one is the level of access. Where I'm at, you can go to Walmart and you can go to 25 different dollar stores and it's crap. And so the question and the words with regard to verbiage, what we're talking about is moving away from sort of the 20th century processed food back to what are traditional foodways. And you can be in some community on a mountaintop in Central America and they don't even know what their foodways were anymore. But that thing still happens here in the United States, where we removed what whole food, and I don't mean anything beyond unprocessed greens, hard vegetables, and we have to understand that part of what we're doing is an education in what those traditional foodways are. So how do we cook collard greens? How do we get at, is it a food bus? And so understanding what those traditional foodways are and being that educational tool is part of what we need to be doing.
Thanks, Chris. Do you guys want to address this?
Yeah, I'll touch on that briefly. That brings up a really good point, which we kind of touched on earlier about just like food education and and kind of like reflecting on our region and, patterns I've seen. We have this very white, very homogenous population, and really, like up in the UP and, lack of like large cities, culture, diverse cultures, and there's this disconnect even, within those populations to what their traditional foods were. And we've kind of like lost the intergenerational connection, between people who understood, what traditional foods are, how to use them, and where we're at with our modern population. And yeah, exactly. And so I think a big part of this movement is kind of like, creating a platform for, people to, get together like intergenerationally and from diverse cultures and bring and share that knowledge and kind of create that exposure.
Beginning of the party.
All right.
So here.
Not a dance party.
Did you have a question?
My question is for Will. I work at Agricole, and my experience working at Agricole has been really great, but I don't see my demographic as a brown person reflected in Southeast Michigan and the food system really at all. And so my question is, as like Argus being kind of like a leader in this movement of like local foods and better quality foods and food accessibility, like how is Argus inviting brown and black like stakeholders in Detroit Metro into this conversation where you're not the white savior, but you're creating seats at the table for us to collaborate?
That's a great question. We actually don't work with a ton of Detroit Metro folks. Just they stay closer to Eastern Market, but it is it's something that's been on our mind. Like, right, how do we include more BIPOC people in all forms of our, how do we increase representation in our customer base? How do we increase representation in our producers? And we're not a land access, land development organization. Our overall, our mission is quite narrow, right? So how do we encourage a wider involvement without having too much mission drift? And on the customer side, that's partnering with the right shareholders, right? So it's or community members. We're developing we're having conversations with the Peace Neighborhood Center, which is a largely African American neighborhood association on the west side of town. We're reaching out in our marketing strategies because currently we market essentially to people who follow us on Instagram, which is a relatively monolithic ethnic group. So it's a lot of white people. So it's really trying to figure out how to expand our reach and how we get what we're doing into the conversations and the thoughts that other people are having. In terms of increasing the amount of BIPOC producers and farmers we have, it's a really tough issue in Washtenaw County. There's a Washtenaw County Black Farmers Initiative that's trying to do some work around that. What I view as our role is to have the markets for those people to sell at when they're ready to sell at it, right? We want to prioritize people of color to bring up representation, but we also just need strong markets for any farmer, any producer to come in and be able to have a viable living based on the production of whatever they're growing. So we don't have a lot of answers to that, but we're trying to figure it out. And I think the biggest thing is we have a pretty white staff. We're a lot of university students, a lot of upper middle class kids working at Argus. So it's not entirely our community to reach out to, but if we partner with the right shareholders, we can diversify our customer base, we can diversify our staff, we can diversify our producers, but it has to be something we do consciously and with intentionality, and we haven't quite cracked the code on how to really create an Argus community that reflects our broader Washtenaw community.
All right, so I can feel it, Jonathan's itching to jump in on that question, but I think we have one more question. There was one here. So we'll have this be our last question after Jonathan jumps in.
I do want to just kind of tackle both questions, actually, Chris's question as well. So when we look at the overall makeup, especially among African Americans, and I'm not sure what all the statistics are among other minorities, but 1.2% of the overall farm community is African American. So it is very difficult for someone like Argus to be able to say, hey, we want to reach out to all of these other African American farmers when the population is so small and minute. Then when we talk, I know in the state of South Carolina, the average age of a farmer is 57. The average age of a black farmer is 72, right? So then you say, hey, how do I reach now a 72-year-old farmer who has such a distrust for USDA or all of these other government agencies because of past actual facts? This is not things that they're making up as far as the distrust. This is very much so true. And so it's a little disingenuous of us sometimes to put all of the pressure on organizations like an Argus, who I think has created the best model for us to be able to tackle some of these issues. Chris, to your point, food accessibility in African American communities and minority communities is not the issue. And so I will invite you to come to my workshop later to explain that. It's not a food accessibility issue, and we need to stop kind of creating that narrative, because academics and I believe media has perpetuated the whole food desert thing, and that is not the issue. There's a much deeper underlying issue that we need to tackle. Sorry.
Yeah, no, thanks. Our last question.
Well, you guys ended up hitting it a lot, because I was just gonna speak to, we have a grocery store in upstate New York, and, we made it part of our producer application, asking folks if they identified as marginalized, BIPOC, queer, women-owned, and just made a commitment to prioritizing folks from the get-go, and was curious, like, how people are doing that, or not, yeah. So it sounds like there's thinking around that. So that was one thing, and then there was I was going to give you a plug for a tiered market in our area. That did start out as a rolling grocer and now has a brick and mortar. It's called Rolling Grocer still, even though they're no brick and mortar. We also just speaking to the eating traditional foods and like in community and cooking together. Like we partner with a Black-led organization that does food distribution to like 180 families now on a biweekly basis, and we help order food for them, and culturally appropriate food that they're going to cook, and there's lots of community events where they're cooking together, and so that's what it's like all about.
Thank you. I appreciate that there's not a question in there necessarily because we're out of time. But I will say, look at this room. What a great turnout for this session. And, we just kind of scratched the surface. And sometimes when you scratch the surface of issues around institutional oppression, racism and apartheid, it doesn't feel satisfied to stop. But we're going to do that anyway. And we're going to come back to things like seat at the table, labels, like why there is the food issue, like why there are issues in different communities and what's really underlying them. And I would in fact invite everybody from this room to Jonathan's session. Is it later today? Yes. Okay, so we'll pick it up again later today and over lunch. And was that a last word? It is. I have to say that. Do it. Can somebody grab her a mic? So you get to be our last word.
No, you can say the last word. I just want to interject that Detroit is the urban farm capital of the world, and it's right there. So, if we're talking about sourcing from Black farms in terms of proximity to Washtenaw County to being in Detroit, I just think we have to.
Can you tell us where you're from?
I'm from Kalamazoo.
Oh,
I'm from Virginia, but I'm from Zoo City Farm and Food Network in Kalamazoo, Michigan.
But shout out to Detroit. Great. Thanks, everybody. Look forward to continuing this conversation. Thanks to our awesome panelists.